Kevin. Let's turn to our final segment here. We have a story here involving Julian Assange, and I know you have some updates on your upcoming coverage. But first, we want to talk about this. After more than 6 months, Assange was finally allowed to visit, quote unquote, with family. What is this story?
Yeah, this is a big deal because we know with COVID-19 pandemic, and this is for almost any prison around the world, especially in countries that have not taken the appropriate steps to control the spread of the virus. So, in this case, we would be talking about the United States being the worst offender, and many families have been without much contact, if they've had any contact at all, for the last 6 months when it comes to prisons. In London, this is the first time since March 22nd that Julian Assange was able to have a visit with his fiancé, Stella Moris, and his two children, who are 1 and 3 years old. And so they came, but at Belmarsh, he had to wear a face mask and he had to wear visor for a 20-minute meeting, and they were not allowed to touch each other. In fact, he was told if he had touched his children, he would have to isolate for 2 weeks. And so that essentially would be solitary confinement that he would have to endure in order, just because he maybe wanted to hold his kids during this time, or give them a hug. So Julian said it was the first time he had been given a mask because things are very different behind the doors. This coming from Stella. Oh, by the way, this was covered by PA Media Group, which is in London. Stella said I could not see him very clearly because of the visors, but he looked a lot thinner. He was wearing a yellow armband to indicate his level of prisoner status, and you could see how thin his arms were. At least he got to see the children, even though he couldn't touch them. The children were both calm. We all remained seated the whole time. There's this story that is very humanizing about Gabriel reciting the alphabet and counting and showing his dad that he's learning at the age of 3. And then Stella says that Assange is still suffering from a frozen shoulder and recently sprained his ankle and is in a lot of pain. It was clear that there is suffering that continues for Assange. We know his health hasn't been good the entire time that he's been incarcerated or detained for this period, while he awaits the outcome of his extradition case.
Thanks, Kevin.
So I guess I was going to have you cut in and ask me another question, but I'll just go on to the updates that we have about our Assange coverage coming up, and then you can conclude with any other remarks that you have for this week's episode. Any business things you want to talk about with Shadowproof? So we put in a application to the UK court on August 25th, which was 2 days before recording this edition of the show. And I made it clear that I was not comfortable with the risks posed to my health if I would have to travel to the courthouse in the United Kingdom. There were unclear instructions, in fact, no instructions given to me. So I didn't know if I would have to quarantine for 10 or 14 days before the hearing is scheduled to start on September 7th. And in fact, I was not in London yet. So if I needed to quarantine for 2 weeks, I would have to get to London and I would have to stay somewhere. And when the proceedings began on Monday, I would not be able to go to the courthouse. I would probably not be able to go to the courthouse to cover until the second week of the proceedings. And so I made the decision that, given the lack of instruction from the court, that I wanted to push for remote access for all international journalists. It seems like there shouldn't be much issue with anyone who is based in the UK if they would like to be accredited and have access. It seems like there are going to be at least one, if not two rooms that journalists can go in. Expect a few dozen journalists who are in the country to be able to cover the proceedings. But what about international journalists? I mean, I'm in this predicament. Stefania Marizzi, an Italian journalist well known for her coverage of this case, also has to contend with the same issues that I'm contending with. I know that Joe Loria of Consortium News has wanted to has covered this and was there at the extradition hearing last round in February. There are other American journalists who would normally travel if there wasn't a global pandemic. What are we supposed to do? We didn't receive any instruction, but fortunately, I submitted this application. I never heard any official response from the court, but fortunately, there isn't anything additional that I need to do at this time with that application. I received instructions today that said there's going to be a cloud video platform for journalists. This is excellent news. This means that I can cover the hearing from wherever I am in the United States. Be in Chicago. I might be in another state for a period of time, but I'm going to be able to cover it. I'll have to contend with the time zone difference, and that's going to make this an adjustment as far as my schedule goes. I'll be doing my coverage from 3 a.m. to 10 or 11 a.m. in the morning in order to follow this very closely. And it's going to be exhausting. And but I know I'm going to have all of your support as I crank out these reports and do what I did last round in February. I expect it to be very intense, but the fact that we've now resolved this outstanding issue and the court is finally giving journalists some kind of information about what they plan to do is such a relief. So far, we have had extraordinary difficulties with this court and what they have done during the COVID-19 pandemic. Any case management hearings in the past 4 to 6 months have been plagued with issues. They have a conference call video line. I don't know how many of you are aware of what's gone on, but they have been so dysfunctional in how this is conducted that journalists get on the conference call line. They aren't muted, so people are talking and there's background noise and you can't follow the court proceedings, or they don't patch you into the court so you can't hear what's happening in court, or there's music, or they give you the wrong courtroom and you get the wrong case that you're listening to and you need to move over and then you miss what happened in the Assange case management hearing. And for the most part, there isn't anything from the court in the way of an apology or an admission that they screwed up. There's no resolution to this, and we're just left hanging. And so we've been proactive, trying to make sure that this doesn't happen when this critical hearing happens on September 7th. It's going to go through some exceptional issues. It's also the only evidentiary hearing that Assange is going to get in this case. This is his big opportunity to put evidence on the record that will rebut the United States and convince, hopefully, the judge that he should not be extradited to the United States. And we know, given all of the risks to press freedom, that it's crucial that people are able to pay attention. Unfortunately, under law in the UK, it's prohibited to live stream to the public this court proceeding. But the press, myself, we will do our best to be your eyes and ears and to cover and to give you up to the minute reports while it's unfolding. And then my process will be similar to what happened in February, where I'll do a report, a video report at the end of the court day, which is going to be, for me, at about 11 or noon on any given day. And then I will do a write-up about what happened that was significant. And so we'll get tweeting, you'll get a video, and then you'll get a written report. And that'll be comprehensive coverage of what's going on in this case that we've committed ourselves to covering at shadowproof.com for very many reasons, but also some of it has to do with the last 10 years. This has been a focus of my work, and it goes all the way back to Chelsea Manning's court-martial, and I'm just finishing up this thread. It's hard to ignore the fact that the publisher which the source gave material to, is now facing prosecution. And that's why it is, I think, critical for Shadowproof to be out in front, giving this the attention and the coverage that is demanded.
Definitely. And I just want, for folks who are listening out there, I want to commend you, Kevin, for all of the hard work, obviously not just over the years, but in particular, given how complicated things are with the pandemic and trying to cover a case that's happening in London, and trying to arrange that while we're in the United States. You have done really amazing work on that. And I just want to encourage folks, what Kevin is doing and what he's talking about is indeed an incredibly important public service. It is something that is going to take a lot of labor. It already has. And even though he may not be traveling, we should be considering how we can support him in that work. So I just want to encourage folks. We're going to probably put out a call in the next week or so as we approach the date, but you can get a head start if you want to help Kevin, support him, if you want to back him up while he's in there, like you said, being your eyes and ears. Consider going to shadowproof.com/donate. Even if you're just giving $5 or $10, it helps. So please consider supporting his work. It's a lot of work. It is. It's a lot.